Welcome to Stories That Touch. Today's story is False Accusation, a boy, a cop, and a lesson in justice. Let's get started.
On a bright Saturday morning in Austin, Texas, 12-year-old Jake rode his bike to the nearby Family Mart grocery store. Jake was a cheerful kid with big dreams. His father, Mr. Carter, owned Family Mart, but not many people in the neighborhood knew that. Mr. Carter wasn't one to show off his wealth. To him, the store was a family business, something he had built with hard work and dedication. Jake entered the store to buy a soda and his favorite candy bar. As he walked down the aisle, he noticed a police officer staring at him from across the store. It was Officer Olivia Brooks, a newcomer to Austin, known for her strict nature and tendency to judge people too quickly. Jake didn't pay much attention to her and focused on finding his candy. As he approached the checkout counter, Officer Brooks suddenly blocked his path, her voice sharp and accusatory. "Hey kid, what do you think you're doing?" Jake looked up, surprised. I'm just buying a soda and some candy, ma'am." Officer Brooks narrowed her eyes. "You think you can just take whatever you want, don't you?" She grabbed Jake's wrist. His face turned pale as he stammered, "I didn't do anything wrong, ma'am. I have money to pay." But Officer Brooks didn't listen. She shook her head, muttering, "Shoplifting, huh? Thought you could get away with it." A few customers in the store turned their heads, whispering to one another. Jake felt embarrassed and scared. He tried to explain, but it was no use. Officer Brooks dragged him toward the exit, leaving his bike lying on the ground, forgotten in the chaos. Just then, Mrs. Linda, the store manager who had worked for Mr. Carter for years, noticed the commotion. She quickly stepped forward, concerned. "Officer, what's going on here?" Officer Brooks responded firmly, "I caught this kid shoplifting." Mrs. Linda looked at Jake with sympathy. She knew Mr. Carter's son well and trusted him. "Officer, I think there's been a misunderstanding. I know this boy." But Officer Brooks wasn't interested in listening. "Ma'am, stay out of this." Jake stayed quiet, hoping someone would help. Just then, a sleek black SUV pulled up outside the store. Out stepped Mr. Carter, his face calm but his eyes sharp with concern. He immediately noticed the commotion and saw his son in the officer's grip. Without hesitation, he approached, his voice steady but firm. "Excuse me, officer. What's going on here?" Officer Brooks barely glanced at him. "Step back, sir. This boy was caught stealing." Jake's eyes met his father's. Mr. Carter gave him a reassuring nod, silently telling him that everything would be okay. Taking a deep breath, Mr. Carter said, "I'm Carter, the owner of this store. This is my son. I can assure you he wasn't stealing anything." Officer Brooks frowned, still holding Jake's arm tightly. Anyone can claim to own a store. By now, a small crowd had gathered outside, watching. Mr. Carter calmly pulled out his wallet and showed Officer Brooks his ID and business license. "Here's my proof. I've owned Family Mart for over 10 years. If my son says he didn't steal, I believe him." Officer Brooks glanced at the documents, her face turning red with embarrassment. But instead of letting Jake go, she muttered, "Kids these days think they can do whatever they want." The crowd murmured, sensing the unfairness of the situation. Mr. Carter kept his tone polite but firm. "Officer, I understand you're doing your job, but my son doesn't deserve to be treated this way." Reluctantly, Officer Brooks released Jake's arm, but shot Mr. Carter a warning look. "Fine, but I'll be keeping an eye on him." Jake let out a relieved breath, still shaken. Mr. Carter placed a comforting hand on his son's shoulder. "Jake, go inside with Mrs. Linda." Jake quickly went back into the store. Mr. Carter turned to Officer Brooks, his voice unwavering. "This isn't how we treat people in this neighborhood. You should be fair to everyone." Officer Brooks scoffed, but noticed the weight of the crowd's judgment as she got into her car. For a brief moment, she wondered if she had made a mistake. The next day, a letter from the Austin Police Department awaited Officer Brooks on her desk. Her superiors had heard about the incident, and the chief wanted to discuss it with her. Feeling uneasy, Officer Brooks stepped into Chief Miller's office. The chief looked at her with disappointment. "Brooks, I heard about yesterday. Is it true you accused a boy of shoplifting without any evidence?" Officer Brooks hesitated, then slowly nodded. Chief Miller leaned forward. "You need to apologize to Mr. Carter and his son. We're here to protect everyone, not make them feel unwelcome or unsafe." Officer Brooks didn't like the idea of apologizing, but she knew she had no choice. Later that day, she visited Family Mart. She found Mr. Carter and Jake stacking shelves together, laughing about something. Clearing her throat, she approached them. Jake tensed when he saw her, but Mr. Carter placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. Mr. Carter, Jake. Officer Brooks began, her voice unsteady. I came to apologize. I was wrong to accuse you. I didn't mean to make you feel like you didn't belong. Jake looked at his father, unsure how to respond. Mr. Carter nodded, his face calm and kind. Thank you, officer. It's important to admit when we've made a mistake. Let's put this behind us and move forward. Officer Brooks nodded gratefully. Though she knew she had a lot to learn, she felt a weight lift from her shoulders. In the weeks that followed, she made an effort to know the community better. Little by little, she changed, realizing that respect wasn't earned through power, but through fairness and kindness. Jake learned a lesson too. He understood now that his father's strength came not from anger, but from patience and wisdom. From that day on, Jake knew he was protected, not just by his father's love, but by the courage to stand up for what was right.
Thanks for listening. Don't forget to like, subscribe and turn on the notification bell to follow the next stories.